All right, let's get going. Good morning. Good morning to all of you that are here in the sanctuary or watching online. My name is Charles Thomas, and I'm the worship associate for today. The Unitarian Universalist congregation of Flint is a welcoming congregation where differences are not just tolerated, they are welcomed. This is a place where you can be free to be yourself, your whole self. If you're new here and would like more information as a peer mentor at the Common Ground Sanctuary Runaway Shelter when he was 16 years old. In the intervening decades, he has served in numerous roles in the field of social work, from case management with homeless and severely mentally ill populations, to working with survivors of child sexual abuse, to working at a school for young people with special needs. Ethan obtained his master's degree in social work at the University of Michigan School of Social Work and spent subsequent time focusing on crisis-oriented services and helping clients to heal from post-traumatic stress. Ethan then had the unexpected opportunity to integrate his personal experiences as someone who was raised by a father and brother with autism and a mother with ADHD into his work at the Looking Glass Community Services Center, Centerpoint School in Eugene, Oregon.
Thanks so much, Charles, and thanks to everyone for having me again here today. It's really an honor to be able to share this moment with you all. I'll start with a reading from Jane Addams and her brief memoir, 20 Years at Hull House. Just for a quick background, I'll explain a little more who Jane Addams is, but she's one of the founding mothers of social work and sociology. I remember one family in which the father had been out of work for the whole winter. Most of the furniture had been pawned, and as the worn-out shoes could not be replaced, the children could not go to school. The mother was ill and barely able to come for the supplies and medicines. 2 years later, she invited me to supper one Sunday evening in the little home which had been completely restored. And she gave us as a reason for the invitation that she couldn't bear to have me remember them as they had been during that one winter, which she insisted had been unique in her 12 years of married life. She said that it was as if she had met me, not as I am ordinarily, but as I should appear misshapen with rheumatism or with a face distorted by neuralgic pain, that it was not fair to judge poor people that way. She perhaps unconsciously illustrated the difference between the relief station relation to the poor and the settlement relation to its neighbors, the latter wishing to know them through all the varying conditions of life, to stand by when they are in distress, but by no means to drop intercourse with them when normal prosperity has returned, enabling the relation to become more social and free from economic. We often have and need role models in our lives to show us the way. whether it's our parents, our elders, our community leaders, or those who guide us in our faith. Jane Addams, born in 1860 in Illinois, serves as an example of this kind of role model. She was born into a well-to-do family, yet saw hardship in her early life as her mother and 4 of her siblings passed away before she was even 9 years old. She experienced health issues throughout her life, including tuberculosis of the spine, which led to her finding meaning in the interior world of ideas, of reading, and education. Jane Addams was among the first wave of young women to be college educated in the United States. But as her health problems persisted, they prevented her from continuing that education in medicine. Yet Addams' voracious intellectual life persisted and ultimately led her to exploring progressive and humanistic ideologies of the time. Addams became fascinated by the work of Mazzini, Tolstoy, and John Stuart Mill. Through her intellectual life, Addams learned about the settlement movement in England, which was an idea of integrating people of differing socioeconomic standing via community centers while providing care, resources, and cultural opportunities. She visited Toynbee Hall in London, and from this idea, she gained the inspiration to found Hull House in Chicago. Hull House became a community center that provided cultural and social resources to people of varying classes. This included creating programs like sanitation and health practices. Her advocacy and research led to in history of those who used what they had to do so serve as crucial guideposts for the choices we can make today. I also personally hold Jane Addams as a reference point because I can identify with being precocious and privileged and feeling like I had a choice to make in life. I grew up in a comfortable, upper-middle-class family. Despite this amusing contrast, Common Ground Sanctuary is where I started to define my voice and core belief in the imperative nature of showing up. On my first day, the peer mentor who trained me spent most of the shift in the back smoking cigarettes. And here was another choice: goof off or do what I came to do. I saved the cigarettes for the end of the shift and got to know one of the kids staying at the shelter. She told me about all the spooky music she liked and how her dad hated her baggy jeans. You can tell I was a teenager in the early 2000s. But if there's one impression, I'll censor that last part. Though I initially feared these phone calls, I developed a kind of resolve in the face of crisis that serves me to this day. I've had chairs thrown at me, death threats made. I've had to assess for safety in a toilet stall. I've had a client shadow box in my face and a client overdose in my office during an intake. You learn over time how to show up in crisis and how to avoid making the crisis your own. People need each other so badly, and crisis often emerges from those moments when someone learned that nobody would show up for them when they needed it most. People have to unlearn the kind of loneliness that makes them violent or suicidal or hopeless or dissociative. When you show up to help, you do see this kind of unlearning. Sometimes you even get to participate in it. At the runaway shelter, kids whose lives were chaotic suddenly found structure in chores, routines, support, and therapy. They found connection to other kids in their position. They could talk through their struggles in group therapy and enjoy healthy recreation. It's amazing how doing something as simple as playing basketball or Uno or watching a movie together can create a sense of safety for a kiddo during one of the most difficult times in their lives. Through the years, I continue to pursue higher levels of care, from case management to learning how to become a therapist myself. I learned that it's often the things we least want to do that challenge us to be the best version of ourselves. As a master's level intern at the Family Assessment Clinic in Ann Arbor, I had the privilege of learning under world-renowned experts in the field of child protection, trauma treatment, and forensic interviewing. I've always liked to explain that my specialty is working with teenagers because that's about where my maturity level has plateaued. But as a student, I was frequently placed outside of my comfort zone. Although it was never my purview, I was challenged to work with young children and to interview perpetrators of heinous acts of abuse. These stories of repeated acts of malice were almost unfathomable, but I had to take notes on the patterns of behavior, the stories they told. And I was asked to work on the other side of it, the children who were at times feral in reenacting their traumas, smashing plastic dolls into one another to gain some sense of mastery over the indescribable things that happened to them. At moments I was sick with it, but at other times I was sitting cross-legged on the ground, watching a 7-year-old learn how to tie her shoes. I showed up, I did my best, and almost 20 years without those who would become my own role models. Beyond Jane Addams, social workers right here and now are giving of themselves in ways that change people's lives on a daily basis. That first model of the wise therapist, Barbara Brosomley at Common Ground Sanctuary, she was reserved, assertive, and eternally wise. I'll never forget seeing a young adult come into the shelter furious, a tall and imposing kid. And the second Barb made eye contact with him, he calmed down and went into her office for a session. I learned so much about resolve and humility from Dr. Robert Ortega, who led the forensic interviews of adults and was undaunted by the perpetrators he sat across for those sessions. Dr. Kathleen Fowler, a pioneer in child protection and forensic interviewing of children, modeled for me the rigor and fierceness it takes to believe a child and to fight for their safety. Most of all, equity, compassion. Our capacities to learn, love, and grow would be starkly limited in isolation. Human neurobiology is built on the development of mirror neurons in the uniquely evolved prefrontal cortices of our brains, the fundamental process of acquiring information and learning that other animals do not possess in the same way that we do. When we see an infant mirroring the smiles and funny faces of their caregivers, the very idea of interdependence is broadcast for all to see and experience. Humanity's biological existence is a singular illustration of the power and necessity of interdependence. The writer Mark Davies discusses this idea brilliantly on his website, oneworldhouse.net. I quote, "Whatever else is grounded in liberating those who are oppressed and in resisting those who repress them." The existentialist philosopher Simone de Beauvoir recognized that the quality of our freedom is inextricably linked with the freedom of others. A responsible use of our freedom is to not only will ourselves to be free, but also to will others to be free. When we use our freedom to cut other people off from their freedom, that is oppression, and the proper response to oppression is liberation. So, I think it becomes especially important to think about how we want to show up for others in a time of political cruelty. You don't need me to describe the ugliness of the current political moment. You can open to show up for one another is essential to our most basic survival. But we can do more. We can help each other thrive. Thank you. We'll now go to our hymn.
This seems like a very appropriate response to that message. Hymn number 131 in the gray hymnal. We're hoping that all 3 verses will be up here. Love will guide us, peace has tried us, hope inside us will lead the way from the road from greed to giving. Love will
Am I on now? Yeah, okay. Does anybody have any questions for, over here, yes, Harold.
A subteacher making inappropriate sexual innuendo comments to attractive female students. A special needs kid that's targeted for abuse. And the last example, a stepdad that got into an argument with his son and shot live bullets into the wooden floor as the kid walked out the door. So I'm guessing that you worked with educators at times, and you would agree with the concept that those who work out there in the field of education are kind of the first line, and you were backup.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. If we just take, yes, my role literally at Centerpoint School was to often back up the teachers, right? No, you have to go to class. You can't use therapy to not do math, right? And so, always math. Although, I was an English major. They didn't like writing either. But yeah, I think that's well observed, and yeah, I mean, often lags. Sometimes there's good reason for that, right? Sometimes it just takes a long time to change a paradigm. But that's just one example. Otherwise, I think there are just some philosophical differences in, like, I think of pick yourself up by your bootstraps, right? This kind of very old way of thinking about intervening with socioeconomic difficulties and things like that. What we find is that something like homelessness, right? Strategies that focus on the practicalities, like housing first, right? Giving somebody a place to live ends up not curing, but ends up helping them do so many other things, right? But nobody wants to give the money for that. Right? No government entity wants to just pay for housing anymore, right? We don't have public housing. We have these extremely limited voucher programs that create barrier after barrier for unhoused people to, just be indoors. And so those are kind of two examples. I think the willingness to use best practices as standard practices, and then these kind of cultural, political sorts of viewpoints where, people don't want help.
People don't. They really don't. They would never think of taking a homeless person into their own home, would they?
Okay, Kathy's got a question.
They wouldn't. No.
All right. Of course, Mike's got one. Oh, and I was right here. I could have walked over there. Yeah.
I lived in Illinois, Chicago for 10 years. Famous for Hall House in the Haymarket, which is, and of course architecture. But how much do you believe that people really have money problems more than anything else?
I think kind of touched on it in the last question. I think there are, as somebody who worked at the homeless shelter in Ann Arbor, I was the intake person for a couple of years. I was the what do they call it? The central point of intake for the entire county. I think, right, I was multifactorial, right? There are many multifactorial, right? There are many, many factors that contribute to homelessness. And it's hard to hear, it's hard to think about. I worked with people who did not want to be housed, right? Because of many factors. I worked with people who their main struggle was addiction, right? And that perpetuated other cycles. And so I think a human being is a complex creature, right? So there's no one answer, but if I could point to one thing that would help everybody who struggles with homelessness or those kinds of issues, poverty in general, it would be economic security. Yeah, but I think underlying your question is that there is no simple, it's not a simple issue. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. It's time for coffee.
so much, everyone.